Hello everyone, thank you for being here. My name is Junho, and it's a pleasure to present to you. Today, I'm going to talk about Bootkitty, a Stealthy Bootkit-Rootkit against modern operating systems. A bootkit is malware that impacts a system before the operating system starts by hijacking the bootloader or kernel during the boot process. In other words, it is an advanced type of malware that targets the boot process, unlike a rootkit, which runs at the kernel level. A bootkit runs at an even earlier stage, in the firmware or bootloader, allowing them to compromise the system. Therefore, one of its biggest features is that it can control everything after the system boots. Furthermore, in recent years, the bootkit threat has remained persistent, with at least one bootkit analysis published each year. First, let's explore the core threats. Bootkits are highly stealthy, hiding in the boot process to evade antiviruses and EDRs. They also achieve persistence by implanting themselves into the boot partition or firmware, allowing them to persist every reboot. By gaining control before the kernel boots, they can hook any code or disable mitigations, which results in full system compromise. There are several mitigations to prevent bootkits, and the most important of this is secure boot. Secure boot verifies the signatures of each bootloader and kernel component, blocking the execution of any untrusted code. If secure boot is bypassed, a bootkit can execute and disable all mitigations in the kernel. In other words, a single vulnerability that allows secure boot bypass can disable the many mitigations currently in place. However, secure boot bypass has been reported due to firmware vulnerabilities, certificate mismanagement, and similar issues. Therefore, we developed Bootkitty, a hybrid Bootkit-Rootkit that runs on Windows, Linux, and Android, by exploiting these vulnerabilities. Bootkitty hooks the bootloader and kernel to gain control early in the boot process. It's built with environment-specific modules that account for each operating system's architectural differences. On Windows and Linux, attackers modify the bootloader on the boot partition to gain control before the kernel starts. On Android, attackers exploit bootloader vulnerabilities to bypass Android-verified boot and gain control in the early stages of the system. Due to time constraints, this presentation will cover only Bootkitties, Linux, and Android. For details on the Windows implementation, please refer to the paper. Linux boots in 4 main stages. First, UEFI loads the signed shim. Next, shim verifies Grub's signature and loads it. Then, Grub loads the kernel and the initial RAM disk into memory. Finally, the kernel starts system processes and completes the boot. First, let's explore shim. Shim verifies Grub's signature before loading it. From an attack perspective, there are 2 main points of interest in shim. First, tampering with the shim binary on the boot partition. Second, hooking the in-memory shim and runtime. Shim simply loads Grub and does not participate in kernel loading or system initialization, making it a low-value attack surface. However, once an attacker gains control of shim, they can extend their hooks into Grub. Grub is the bootloader. It loads the kernel image into memory and transfers control to it, making it the best point to implant hooks before kernel execution. If an attacker injects code at this stage, they can execute it before the kernel loads and extend the hook into the kernel, resulting in full system compromise. An attacker mostly hijacks or modifies grub to control the kernel's execution flow. This method provides paths to inject hooks into the kernel, allowing them to gain control from the earliest stage of the system. During the kernel stage, core services such as the init process and security policies are initialized. On Linux, the kernel rolls in two steps. First, the compressed kernel image is loaded into memory at boot. Then the kernel decompresses that image before executing it. These two steps are mapped into different memory regions. Due to this structure, an attacker can hook the decompression function to disable kernel level mitigations such as lockdown and kernel module signing. This approach allows the attacker to hijack execution before kernel mitigations are applied, providing an attack point for disabling those mitigations. Bootkitty exploits an out-of-bound write vulnerability in the firmware stage, the earliest stage of the boot process, to execute arbitrary code. This vulnerability allows it to bypass secure boot and then inject malicious code throughout the boot process. Now, based on this vulnerability, we will explore a step-by-step scenario showing how Bootkitty gained control of the Linux boot process. The attacker installs the Bootkitty install via USB or over the network and execute it. They then escalate to root privileges and install Bootkitty into the boot partition. Once this is complete, they reboot the system, at which point the modified boot process begins to execute. First, they hijack the grub bootloader to inject hooks into the kernel loading process. Next, they hook the decompression function in the compressed kernel region. Finally, they hijack the decompressed kernel to disable mitigations and load the rootkit. Through this process, the rootkit is loaded and the system is fully compromised. In summary, Bootkitty hooks each stage of the Linux boot process, from shim and grub to the compressed and decompressed kernel, compromising the entire execution flow. Now, let's watch the Linux demo. It will focus on Bootkitty's bootkit compromise. Secure boot and lockdown are enabled. The USB is plugged in, and the installation script runs automatically. The script installs the bootkit into the boot partition with root privileges. After the system reboots, the modified boot process executes. The system boots with the bootkit active. As shown in the demo video, the grub and kernel initialization stages are the primary hijack points in Linux. Next, we explore the Android boot process. The Android system is complex, making it difficult to cover every detail in depth. Therefore, in this presentation, I will briefly introduce only the core content. For more details, please refer to the paper. Returning to the presentation, we use the Samsung device for our analysis, and the boot process is divided into the following exception levels. First, the ROM embedded code runs at exception level 3. Initializes the boot process and loads the bootloader. Next, the bootloader runs at exception level 1, loads the kernel into memory, and prepares it for execution. Finally, the kernel runs at exception level 1, loads the main processes, and completes the boot. First, the ROM stage. The ROM executes first during boot and loads the bootloader. This region 1 set exception memory is embedded in hardware and is difficult to access via software attacks. It also has few known vulnerabilities. Therefore, this stage offers few attack surface. However, if a bootkit is implanted at the wrong stage, it persists across reboots and achieves a high level of stealth, making dictation difficult. Reader kernel is the bootloader used in the Android boot process. It serves as the entry point for kernel execution. This stage runs at exception level 1, and is security critical in the Android because it's where Android verified boot verifies the kernel image's integrity. If an attacker hijacks the bootloader, they gain the opportunity to disable all kernel mitigations. Therefore, an attacker can exploit a bootloader vulnerability to execute arbitrary code. Next, they inject hooks into the kernel loading process. This allows them to disable mitigations and install a rootkit. Therefore, this stage is the best point to prepare for a full system compromise. Android kernel runs at exception level 1 and is based on the Linux kernel. The kernel starts the init process, applies SE Linux policies, mounts file system, and executes core initialization tasks. If an attacker hijacks the kernel loading process at the bootloader stage, mitigations such as real-time kernel protection and SE Linux are already disabled when the kernel runs. As a result, the kernel executes in a compromised environment, enabling the attacker to load a rootkit and gain full control of the system without any additional steps. A single control point gained at the bootloader stage enables attackers to disable mitigations and compromise the entire system. Bootkitty exploits an Odin authentication bypass vulnerability in the bootloader stage to install the bootkit. It then exploits a heap overflow during boot to execute arbitrary code. These vulnerabilities enable the bootkit to run and inject malicious code into the kernel. Now, based on these vulnerabilities, we will explore a step-by-step scenario showing how Bootkitty gained control of the Android boot process. The attacker connects the device to the PC via cable. Next, they exploit a bootloader vulnerability. After successfully exploiting the vulnerability, Bootkitty is installed into the boot partition. When the system reboots, the modified boot process automatically begins execution, and the hooking chain runs. A hook is executed before kernel entry to disable mitigations. Then the bootkit is injected into the kernel and loaded into memory. Through this process, the rootkit is loaded and the system is fully compromised. In summary, in the Android boot process running from the ROM through the bootloader to the kernel, Bootkitty exploits a bootloader stage vulnerability to gain initial control. It then hooks the kernel to gain full control of the system. Now, let's watch the Android demo. It will focus on Bootkitty's bootkit compromise. The device is connected to the computer and enters Odin mode. The attacker exploits a bootloader vulnerability to install the bootkit on the boot partition. The system reboots, and the modified boot process executes. The system boots with the bootkit active. This demonstration shows how control at the bootloader stage enables full system compromise. In today's presentation, we explored how Bootkitty, a hybrid Bootkit-Rootkit that runs on Windows, Linux, and Android, hooks each stage of the boot process to load the rootkit. Bootkits execute before the operating system loads, persist after reboot, and gain control of the system prior to kernel loading, making them more dangerous than rootkits. Therefore, research into boot process hardening and boot chain integrity verification remains essential. Due to time constraints, today's presentation did not cover Bootkitty on Windows, operating system specific mitigation bypass techniques, or rootkit deployment process. For full details on Bootkitty, please refer to our paper. We have published our Bootkitty functional test machine on Jinho. You can download and run it to reproduce our results. That concludes the presentation. Thank you for your attention.